Hi everyone, welcome to the Dram Team Live. If you don't know who I am, my name is Vin PF. I am No Nonsense Whisky on YouTube, and today, as always, we've got Chris here, who is the founder and lead guy of the Dram Team. Hi Chris, how you doing?
Hello Vin, hello everyone else. I'm doing very well. I have to say, I like this Friday scheduling.
Yeah, me too. It's fitting in quite well. It's like a straight after work kind of vibe. Hopefully, it's convincing people to open up their sets and get tasting. But you know, if the timing doesn't work for people that are watching, then let us know and we'll see what we can do. But you know, this stream is going to be available post as well. So if it doesn't work for you now, then maybe it can work for you later.
Yeah. So whether you're watching live or whether you're catching it later, hello and happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Happy Friday.
I've certainly the dram today. It's been a flat out day. We had a very busy day here. Well, I've had a very busy day here at the office. Just looking ahead for the next couple of months. In fact, further than the next couple of months. So kind of got a decent idea of what we do right up until Christmas, which is cool. It's always fun to have that. That's the fun part of the job. Trying to figure out all the logistics that make it happen is not so fun, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I mean, it must be tough to kind of think that far ahead. I mean, obviously, I am a member of the Dram Team and have been since the very start. So I don't really get involved in any of that sort of side of it. I just sort of help you out with the live streams and things. For me, it's great because I just get to drink these things every month.
Yeah, that's the easy part of the job. Yeah, it is difficult, but it is fun choosing them. It's just the balancing all the budget and where you order them from and the timings and production, all that. And at the moment, we have a bit of a challenge because of COVID, our production costs are super high. And so we're having to work a little bit more carefully with the budget and closely with the brands in order to kind of get a little bit more support on price rather than just ordering directly, which is what we'd historically have done. So that's quite good fun in a way because it's nice to chat to the brands, chat to the people at the brands. They're all really helpful and keen. And it's just quite a lot of time versus just ordering it directly without having to discuss anything other than how soon it's going to get delivered. But we do have, as a result, we actually have some really compelling and interesting lineups coming up. So I probably won't give any spoiler alerts because frankly, at this point, plans keep changing on me too fast. So if I give a spoiler, I'd probably be proved wrong within a few weeks. So let's focus on the world whiskies for today then.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one because, I mean, I like every single box that you guys send out because it's always new and interesting things. But I particularly like world whiskies because I don't tend to stick to one kind of whiskey on my channel. I like to try things from all over the world. And I've only really tried, I was looking at it before, I've only really tried, I think, 2 or 3 of these before. And only one of them I own a bottle of right now, which I think you probably guess which one that is. But it's but it's really good to try this sort of thing. Like, hopefully, this has been received by some people that are kind of maybe a bit more Scotch orientated or a bit more bourbon orientated, and they're going to try some new things from around the world.
Yeah, well, I think with the world. So the whole point of what we do, right, is to explore and try new whiskies. And I think people buy our product or subscribe to our club. Especially people often buying for gift because they like single malt Scotch, and possibly sometimes I would say they have too narrow a view on it being single malt and on it being Scotch only. And I think I get that. I understand why it's that way with some people and their experience and what they've heard, and the reputation of Scotch is fantastic, right? But I think if you don't go out and try some world whiskies, especially right now in the time we're in, and with the sort of advent of world whiskey everywhere, not just in the more well-known whiskey producing countries outside of Scotland, then you are just missing out on a ton of really good whiskey. So the world whiskies box is for me just the kind of epitome of what we're about in terms of exploring new whiskies, trying new styles you might not have tried that are more synonymous with other whiskey producing nations, and just pushing your horizons a little bit. And I'm a massive world whiskey fan. Honestly, I could probably do a world whiskey box. A world whiskey subscription, frankly. Haven't gone that far yet, but we do like to do at least one box a year where we do the whole thing outside of Scotland. So shall we get stuck into the first expression?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say before we get started, anyone who's watching, we're going live on YouTube and Facebook. So we'll try and keep track of the comments and throw up some comments on the screen. If you guys want to ask any questions, if you want to chuck any tasting notes out there, then please feel free to on both of those platforms. They'll both be seen. We'll try to respond to your stuff throughout the show. Yeah. But first one up is the Nikka Days. So I'll put them up on the screen here so you can see what we're drinking if you join us at any point. There you go. There's the card. I got my card as well. There you go.
Both do it. Snap.
Now, this is an interesting one because I haven't tried this before. So I'm definitely interested in trying this sort of thing.
I was interested in this because it's easy to get a bit snobby about 40% whiskies once you've been drinking whiskey for a while. So for those that are listening and don't know, there's this process called chill filtering, which is where you chill a whiskey. There's some of the fats and other chemical compounds in it solidify at the lower temperature and then are physically filtered out, almost like when you've made something at home that's then got cold and the fat sort of solidifies on the surface of it. It's a little bit like that. But amongst whiskey purists, like, it's considered that it might remove some of the original flavor and authenticity of the whiskey that as it would have been out of the cask. So a lot of brands these days are moving towards non-chill filtered and making a thing of that. Now, if you don't chill filter your whiskey, if it's a non-chill filtered whiskey, you can't really bottle it at lower than 43% or it looks cloudy, especially if it's colder. So anything that's 40% has almost definitely been chill filtered, unless the only exception to that would be a really old whiskey that came out of the cask at about 40%, which is pretty rare. So this has certainly been chill filtered, which is a massive turn off for some people. So it would immediately start flashing their kind of skepticism alarm. But I think this is beautiful. And I think it's a good lesson in not turning your nose up at whiskey that's been chill filtered. Because there are plenty of decent ones out there. And I think regardless of what you think about your positions on the actual process, let the results of the whiskey production process speak for themselves or for each dram, I would say.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm a big fan of Nikka anyway. When people ask me about a kind of go-to Japanese whiskey, I tend to tell them about Nikka from the barrel. One of my absolute favorite whiskeys. It's a stunning dram. So I've been meaning to pick this up, I have to say, but it's just I haven't got around to it yet. But it's got quite a decent proportion of grain in it, which is a winner. I like that.
Yeah, and that might explain why I like it. So I'm a sucker for a decent single grain. And I think that certainly that makes me more amenable to blends than some of the people would be anyway. Now, of course, when it's a Japanese blended whiskey, we don't necessarily really know what that means always. It might be to do with what distillation method's been used, what sort of grains have been used. It's a little bit less clear than with the Scotch. I mean, I'm not the best informed on the actual rules in Japan, but I do know they're just a lot looser. So, for example, this could actually contain Scotch that's been taken to Japan, aged in Japan, and bottled in Japan, and then brought back here. So it's a little bit more of the Wild Wild West when it comes to what goes into it. But as I say, let the results speak for themselves. And I love this one for me, just the nose is like fresh and sweet and summery. And that sort of makes sense with how it positions itself. If you've got the tasting card there, anyone who's drinking along at home, it's kind of just described as a classic, easy sipping and vibrant blend. And it positions itself from a marketing perspective as being quite good for summertime drinking, for, say, a highball. And the Japanese often drink their whiskies as a highball, especially in the summer. So I think I could see that, and I'd say it was quite a summery seeming dram. How are you finding the taste?
Now, something I was going to say on this one here, I mean, I've been covering a lot of whiskey recently that's left me with a kind of a spicy finish. Like I got a lot of cinnamon, a lot of nutmeg, a lot of peppery spice on the back end. Skipping a little bit forward to go to the back end, but for me, there's not really a lot of that, but it's just really gentle all the way through.
It's super mellow.
Yeah.
Dare I say smooth.
Smooth, yeah.
Word there. So smooth is sort of the ultimate no-no in terms of describing whiskey. But for me, this is the epitome of a smooth whiskey.
Yeah, and it's it's interesting what you said, because I know I've never been to Japan, but I know a bit about the culture of whiskey there, and they'd be quite happy to mix and put ice in something like a 30-year-old Scotch that a lot of Scotch drinkers would probably turn their nose up at that. But this here, although it's been clearly designed for like highballs, like you said, actually it's a lot better than a lot of the blends that we would be served here that you would get as a cocktail mixer. I've got a few downstairs that aren't that great. This is very nice to drink on its own. Very nice to drink on its own.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, dangerous word to describe a whiskey with, but sessionable. Sort of the whiskey equivalent of like a 4% IPA from, you know, like Neck Oil or something like that from Beavertown or something like that is really drinkable. And at 40%, obviously, it is going to be a bit easier on the palate. I see we've got Graham. Hello, Graham. How you doing? Graham's another Bristol fella, like I am, or certainly near Bristol. Herb aftertaste. Yeah, I think I do. I saw that pop up in the comment stream, and I was thinking, I agree. What is it got? A particular herb? Almost like aniseed, maybe.
Yeah, it's like for me. I mean, I get this a lot on more youthful grains. Anyway, like as you know, we're both big fans of grain, and we like well-aged grain. This is probably a little bit more youthful to get into the price bracket that it is, but I always get this kind of like floral note from these younger grains, and that's probably what you're experiencing there. Is a kind of herbal note, that kind of like it's like a herb garden, isn't it? There's just a mixture of everything going in there.
Yeah, I get that. Almost a bit like with the you get it with some lighter honeys. Like, is it acacia honey, or you get those fancy sort of spring flower honeys and things like that? There's that lightness and sweetness to it that has a herbal note as well. No, I actually really like this. I think because, as I've said before, and for anyone who's listening that doesn't know, I don't necessarily taste the whiskies. In fact, most of the time I don't taste the whiskies before I put them in the box. It's not about what I like. It's about what I'm interested in exploring and trying. Because if I pick stuff I like, it wouldn't necessarily work any better for anyone else either. And I have to say, like, of the ones in this box, this is probably the one I was most skeptical about in terms of reading about it, because it is positioned as a blend for mixing and that sort of thing. And however much you educate yourself around how good blends can be and all that stuff, I think there's just still this slight thing in my head, 40% blend, position for mixing. How good is it going to be? Like, I don't think it's remarkable in terms of the intensity of flavor or any particular spikes of flavor, but I do think it's extremely well balanced and rounded as a dram, and like incredibly drinkable. How's everyone in the comments getting on with this? Who is actually drinking along tonight? I see some familiar names. I was going to say faces, probably not. But,
we've got
a long time customer, I know. Andy, I've seen you commenting on Facebook a little bit. Hello. I said Graham, I know from here locally in Bristol. I see we've got Tim and Paul. So we've got a few people with us, I think.
Definitely. And we've got one of my buddies from Taiwan. There you go. I don't think he's got the box.
No, I can pretty much guarantee that Dan does not have a box, but howdy, Dan. Nice to have you join us.
Yeah, so we've got a few people hopefully tasting along anyway. But yeah, so like I said earlier, do feel free to drop some tasty notes and let us know, even if you're not particularly fond of it. It's good to know why you're not fond of something, because that's what this is all about, right? It's just about exploring whiskey and finding your boundaries, your taste profile. I don't tend to dislike much these days in terms of whiskey. There are a few out there, but you haven't provided any of them to me yet. Oh, actually, I've just remembered. There was that one. We say it every time, don't we? The Solist, you know, that one that I definitely didn't like and you love.
Yeah, that was really weird that you don't like that.
Yeah, I know.
So I super enjoyed that. That was really delicious.
Yeah, it's a really good dram. I'm very happy with it. To be honest, actually, that's made me think about getting a bottle of that, which is something I probably wouldn't have stretched for before, because I've got enough stuff to cover, so I don't tend to worry about sourcing things specifically. My way.
Well, I honestly can't remember the RRP on it, but I believe it's reasonably accessible in price. I can actually hang on. I do document this stuff at some point during the planning process. So let me see if I can pull that up, and then I can talk to it a little bit. What box is this? 46? No, 47. But I remember this one being, I think, probably this and the Lambay were the two that I remember being the most reasonably priced. So I don't think it is particularly pricey. So I think what I would be interested in picking up for, other than having a sort of sessionable dram, would be something like if I was getting into trying to make whiskey cocktails, particularly in the summer. I don't think it would carry well in something more robust, like an old fashioned. But I think if you're making a kind of summery cocktail with it, or something a whiskey variant and another light cocktail, then I think that would work quite well.
What Graham's saying here is probably true. I mean, I've just had a look. Although the From the Barrel is a half litre, 500 ml instead of a full-sized 700, it's in the same price bracket, the £30 to £35 mark, which seems a bit of a shame. I think hopefully it'll come down in price at some point, but they'll do deals on it if it doesn't sell at some point in the UK. But I think the £30 mark is probably
on this Nikka, is that, or is that on
the Nikka Days? Yeah,
because the From the Barrel does often actually end up on insane offers. Sometimes it's 25 quid, but it's very different. So it depends. Like stylistically, if you really like this one, the Nikka From the Barrel is kind of this ramped up to 11 is how I'd sort of describe it. So I'd probably pick whichever one you preferred for the reason you're going to be drinking it. So yeah, I do have that at about 39 RP, so that is a bit more than I thought. So next up, are you ready to move on?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. This is an interesting one because I first heard of Lambay at the Somerton virtual festival, but I didn't actually get round to trying the dram. It's up here still, somewhere.
Well, do you recognise the bottle?
Yeah, it's just the little tiny ones that you did for them, I guess. Because
yeah. So I actually did those on that table right behind me. We helped them out with I think a few brands struggled with just getting minis, partly the timing of the festival with COVID and everything, but just also like having minis to hand for like festival purposes is not always something that every brand has, because the miniature bottling market is quite difficult. You have to do a very big run if you want to do them. So yeah, I ended up doing those here because they're Irish whiskey. They don't need to be done in Scotland, obviously. So they were done here at HQ, old school style, with our little pumping machine and me sort of using the electric drill and going along and capping them all. So that was good fun to see them out in the world.
Definitely, yeah. And I heard really good things about this afterwards. People were really raving about it. In fact, I need to change that. There you go. So now we are on the Lambay. Is it? I guess it's Lambay, not Lambay or something like that. It's the Cognac Cask. Small glass.
This one's inherently interesting to me because I really like Cognac. I'm just going to break off briefly to say hello to Callum. Hello, Callum. I can see Callum's joined us after first coming across us due to the Glen Scotia Dunnage tasting set we did. Thanks for your kind words there, Callum. And that was an absolutely banging tasting set. The nicest thing we probably put in miniatures. So glad you got to take part in that. I hope you enjoy this month's drams. So yeah, I love Cognac. So people that might not know what Cognac is, it's a type of brandy specifically made in the Cognac region of France. And so it's made from grape, essentially. Well, in this case, it's made from grape. Brandy in general can be made from quite a lot of different fruits, but Cognac and Armagnac are grape derivatives. And this particular Cognac producer that is involved in the Lambay whiskey is Camus or Camus. I'm not 100% certain on the pronunciation. It doesn't sound particularly French, but their casks are used to finish this whiskey. And like, because I love Cognac, it doesn't always follow this way. It feels like it should logically, but I kind of assume that I'm going to enjoy the influence of a Cognac cask on a decent Irish whiskey. So that's what we're looking at here. And I think that for me, nose is super Cognac-y, which won't mean anything to anyone who hasn't tried Cognac. But I do recommend giving that a little go and branching out into some Cognac and Armagnac if you get a chance. But my advice would be go for the good stuff. The good stuff is really, really noticeably better with Cognac and Armagnac. I think with whiskey, you get a lot of really good stuff under 50 quid. With Cognac and Armagnac, there's a real huge kind of ratcheting up of quality and flavor once you get into some of the more expensive stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And it's the same with rum, I find as well. Like I'm not really into many other distilled spirits other than whiskey, but I'm just getting into cognacs and rums a little. And there's a massive difference between what you would call like supermarket rum. And the 50 quid and above Dominican sugarcane rums.
Yeah, I think it's the same. Like, to me, the jump would be more equivalent to sort of an under 20 mass blend versus a decent 40-pound single malt, like from a well-respected quality producer. So that's the sort of jump I would say was there. But I think with Cognac and Army, you have to go a little bit more expensive to get that quality.
Definitely, yeah. I can definitely, I mean, as limited as my Cognac knowledge is, I can definitely get that Cognac influence on this. I don't think this would
sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, I don't think that would work very well on a really robust Scotch, but a light triple distilled Irish whiskey, good influence on there. Good influence.
Oh, someone said yes, massive difference. The Dram Team. I'm not saying. I think that's Ed running the Dram Team social. I've got confused. But I think. I think he's chiming in about our Cognac and the step up. Sounds like Ed likes his Cognac as well. But I honestly think if you gave it to me blind, I would probably assume it was Cognac and not whiskey. I can't guarantee that because I know from experience that when I taste things blind, I'm absolutely useless. As many people find they are once they take away any sort of preconception around what's on the bottle and the distillery they're drinking and that sort of thing. But yeah, the nose, I would just think I was smelling a Cognac. It's so caramelly apples to me, like lots of caramelly orchard fruit, or tart tatin is sort of what I associate with Cognac and Armagnac. I think there's just oodles of that on the front end.
Yeah, Graham's saying the palate is a little weak, but the finish really makes up for it. Tastes higher, feels higher than the 40% advertised, which I think.
Yeah, so I'd say kind of the nose is great. And then it sort of announces itself quite quietly and sort of ramps up a little bit, and then that lingers, which is nice. And again, like for me, the finish, as Graham's picked out, that lingers is sort of mirroring the nose. There's more spice, but kind of a white peppery heat or something to it, which you wouldn't normally expect much of at 40% from alcohol. But I think it's the fruit and the kind of caramel bit, like toffee apple, that sort of lingers for me.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I wonder, just reading the card, I don't think they haven't said what kind of grains they're using, because I know Irish blends tend to use a little bit of unmalted or green barley in there as well, rather than fully malted barley. That's it doesn't say if it's pot still or not. I don't know if you've got a bottle around near you, but
no, I don't. I don't have any. I don't think that information was shared. I do have some information. Being from Lambay was kind enough to share some information for me with me about this, but I don't have it at hand. But I don't think that's made public. I think in general with Irish whiskey, so this is aged on Lambay Island, which is owned by the company owners. So that's quite unusual in its own right. But there's people here probably know more about Scotch, but in general in Ireland, yes, as you said, there's more use of different grains. There's kind of there's three different categories of whiskey. They don't do just single malt. It is tend to be blended Irish whiskey. There's also single pot still Irish whiskey. And I am nowhere near as up to speed on the regulations and rules about what goes into all of those as I am on Scotch, because that's the bread and butter of what we do. But it does mean you get a little bit more of a varied style and flavor profile. And I love Irish whiskey. I mean, I find it, I like the caramel, fresh apples, orchard, fresh grassy hay, like some of those sort of notes that you get through, along with the kind of vanillas and almost bourbon style influence. And I don't often know if I'm not really certain if that's just the use of casks or if that's to do with the style. It's something I really I'd love to do more Irish whiskey. It's a little bit more difficult to get hold of generally.
Yeah.
In terms of
Pardon? Hopefully it's going to start getting easier, because there's so many more Irish distilleries popping up now, and they're going to want to get their name out to the world. So hopefully it'll start getting easier for you, because until fairly recently, it was only really the big boys that were kind of really pushing Irish whiskey forwards. Now there's a lot more of these smaller ones coming through, like Waterford just released. Very interesting. And obviously Lambay's come out of kind of nowhere as far as I was concerned. Never heard of them before, and suddenly they've got whiskey.
No, I was really impressed because so Lambay's other expression is a single malt, and I think that's also uses cognac casks, again in partnership with Camus, and that was really impressive, really tasty. It's a little bit of a step up in the RP from this blend, but you should have had a sample of that as well. I think in your in your.
Just reach out.
Now. We'll have a live pivot to Vin tasting the single malt as well.
Yeah, I did mean to get around to them, but as you can see, that's not even scratching the surface. I've got a box down here as well. So it's not just your drams I don't drink. It's everybody's.
Well, those are technically sort of mine.
Yeah, true.
You just need to have a big house party at some point where everyone drinks your drams.
I'm not so sure. I'll get to them eventually. I think is the big one because nowadays, this is what I said last month as well, isn't it? Nowadays, I tend to drink every single one of yours because we do the videos, whereas all of these are from boxes from well over 6 months ago and backwards. And it's just when I'm of an evening when I think I might have a dram, I'm usually assessing something for review. So I don't really come up here and start messing around in the samples bar. I should do more, but you know what it's like. There's not enough hours in the day, right?
Yeah, certainly not enough regrowable cells in my liver is the other problem. I mean, I struggle. You can see there's a few things amassing back here on my sort of general purpose whiskey cabinet that I need to taste or just consider including in future boxes and things like that. But we shouldn't be complaining about this. It's really a first world problem of the first order. So what did people make of that? So whiskey. Oh, hello, Al. Whiskey Straight Al is with us.
Whiskey Straight Al's another YouTuber, so go and check him out. Obviously, he does quite a lot of Irish whiskey, which is good. But he does cover
in my list of longest serving Dram Team members who are also YouTubers. I think he's number 2. But Al's been with us for quite a long time as well. So nice to see you, Al. Yeah, I really enjoy that Lambay too. I think it's a super cool production method. I really like the attention to detail in the sourcing of the cognac cask, and I think that really shows through in the cognac influence. And yeah, I'm glad to see it. I think, like you said, it's good to see more Irish whiskey coming to market and also doing things that are a little bit different to the bigger brands that have tended to dominate. So yeah, I think it's a good time, like we said earlier, really, for all world whiskey, but Irish. I mean, it's doing exciting new stuff, even though it's a relatively traditional category of whiskey, which people do associate with whiskey. Ireland and whiskey are somewhat synonymous, like all of the countries in the box. So no, I really enjoyed that. I'm glad that some of the folks are enjoying it too. Are you ready to move a little bit further afield, Vin?
Definitely, yes. I think
so this is what I'm guessing you have a bottle of?
I've got 2 bottles of it, actually, yeah. I'm pretty lucky. One of them's still sealed down here.
Impromptu giveaway.
Definitely not.
No, I don't blame you.
I should really do more stuff like that, but I was a bit weirded out by this when I first saw it, I have to say. This, of course, is the Mackmyra Gronte Te, which is a little bit strange. I don't think I've ever heard of another whiskey doing this. So you kind of makes you think initially, like if it was a good idea, somebody would have done it already. But Angela, there you go. There's the bottle.
Orazio. I don't know how to say the name.
Angela is a little bit of a wizard when it comes to making her whiskey. Shall I get the actual bottle out?
I've managed to get the zoom going. There we go.
There you go.
Al is still on the Lambay there, enjoying the cognac influence again. Sounds like Al knows his cognac as well. So if you're enjoying that whiskey, consider tracking down some decent. Why not go straight to Camus and get some Camus cognac? So Yeah, look, we should probably talk about Mackmyra. So Mackmyra is one of the longer serving, if you can say that, international distilleries that's outside of sort of what I call the big four of whiskey: Scotland, Ireland, Japan, and America. Some would then say Canada was sort of, also traditionally a whiskey producing nation, which is definitely true, just not quite the volume and notoriety of those other four, perhaps. But Mackmyra, outside of those kind of big 4/5, has been on the scene for over 10 years. So they have a 10-year-old whiskey expression. And in terms of international whiskey, that makes them relatively old. So they're comparable to the St. George distillery that's run by the English Whiskey Company. And probably people like Starwood, maybe. I don't know how long they've been around. I don't think, actually, probably like half that time. But there's not a lot of international whiskey with the same level of reputation for making really good quality single malt that could compete with Mackmyra. And because they're not regulated and as closely as Scotch is, they can do some really interesting stuff with casks and also with the input material. So there's a really good expression there, which is peated, called Svensk Ruk, which translates to Swedish smoke. They are Swedish. And I think they use juniper branches, which are often used to be burnt in Sweden and produce a really different influence in terms of the peated barley the smoked barley in this case, because it's not peated, it's smoked, versus, Scottish peat wood when it's burnt. So I think they do a lot of interesting stuff like that. They're not afraid to experiment. Like you say, their master blender, Angela Doazio, is really talented when it comes to coming up with sort of avant-garde recipes for whiskey that make sense. And in this case, I believe it's a blend of whiskey from Oloroso casks. And then what they did was put a lot of really decent quality green tea from Japan, 4 different varieties, into a whiskey. I believe a whiskey cask. I don't believe that was a sherry cask. I'm not 100% sure. Let it rest in there for a period so that the flavors and scents and everything else from the green tea was sort of imbued the cask in terms of influence. Then they took all the green tea out and they put the whiskey in, and probably sell the green tea as whiskey barrel aged green tea as well, I imagine. That's certainly something that I've seen done in other things like beer and ginger beer. So that's how it's made. And I think coming back to what we talked about with the Lambay and the cask influence, like I would never, if you gave me this blind, assume that it was green tea. But knowing that it's green tea, it certainly feels to me like that makes sense in terms of the flavor profile, because there's quite a sort of green herbal little note to it.
Definitely. I think one of the major things that I kind of figured out with this while I was reviewing it, because it's one of the few of these that I actually have reviewed, is that it depends on what your view of green tea is. Like if you go and buy like a Twinings green tea and you like that in a kind of tea bag, then you're probably not going to get green tea notes off of this. But if you've been and tried some proper matcha or sencha loose green tea, 70 degrees, and you've got all that faff to make some proper Japanese green tea, then I think that's more where these flavors are coming from. It's not bitter. Like I find green tea out of a tea bag quite bitter, mainly because you're chucking in 100 degree boiling water, which you shouldn't do if you're having green tea. So this is very much like kind of light, floral, really nice and viscous. I find on the palate as well. It's a pretty substantial step up from the last dram in terms of kind of like overall mouthfeel.
Yeah, I mean, I think this sort of mixing of categories of product is really difficult. You're always in danger. I had some whiskey barrel aged beer before, like an IPA or something, and it honestly just tasted like someone had come and dumped a bad whiskey into your beer. And it's like not how you want it to seem. But on this, like, I don't know about the nose that I really get the tea. I think, as you say, it's quite delicate as a flavor anyway. And I also have no idea how well it infuses into the barrel in terms of influence, because obviously it's dry. It's not, I'm assuming, well, maybe I'm completely wrong. maybe they brewed tea in the barrel. I don't know what they did. I should have probably found that out. I don't think I remember.
Well, from my understanding of it, they sort of they kind of brewed green tea in with the Oloroso. So they basically made like a sherry green tea liqueur.
Oh my goodness!
And rolled that around inside the barrel. I don't know how long for. Like you say, I mean, oak is a funny thing. Like you do get alcohol coming in and out of the wood, but very, very slowly, unless you're in a very high climate like Kentucky or Taiwan or something like that. But somewhere like Sweden, you're not going to get that day and night push in and out of the barrel. So yeah, it depends. I think they left it in there for a couple of months. That's my understanding. I don't know if that's true or not.
But I was about to say, this tastes amazingly like a bourbon or American style whiskey to me, and I've realized that I've just been drinking from the wrong glass. And like the whole time, I swear this tasted more of green tea and really different. I'm like, why doesn't this taste like I remember? Because I've been drinking the Michters. So you can absolutely disregard anything that I just said about nose or flavor, but I don't think I'd committed yet because I was kind of confused about what I was tasting.
Well, that's the beauty of
that bit I said about not being able to get the green tea in the on the nose.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think that you get away with it as well. But I think before we move on to that, Dan Brown's asking about cognacs, about what we'd recommend. Probably one for you because I've only really had a handful. I had one called Chateau de Montefort. But Abacassis as well is always a good one. What would you say, Chris?
Ooh, so there's a particular cognac producer that I fell in love with when I went to the Whiskey Exchange's cognac show, and I remember I did try some Caymus, and I was really impressed by them. I'm trying to remember the name. It was a small independent family-run. Cognac company. So let me just see if I can. Here we go. List of producers, and I'll be able to tell you.
I think that's my favorite thing about cognac, though, isn't it? Because it's
more than I realized.
There's so many little chateaus and whatnot making cognac in the area, and obviously brandy a bit further out. But I really like that, and they're not very expensive either.
No, not all of them. So the one I particularly fell in love with, the name is Frappan. Frapin, Frappan. And Whiskey Exchange, oh gosh, they still have it. Dangerous. They have a Frappan, an old Frappan, 22 years old, single cask, I believe. Now, single vintage or single cask is really, really unusual in cognac because the whole thing is predicated on blending. And I'm far from a cognac expert. But Frappan's, the Whiskey Exchange's exclusive Frappan was just absolutely mind-blowing. It was up there with the best whiskey I've ever tasted for sure. And I think that's the thing that's been a revelation for me about whiskey spirits as a categories is when I find a really, really good one, it is as good as really, really good whiskey for me. But not true in the lower end of the category for me.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Check out Frappan, I would say. And I would definitely check out Caymus or Camus. I still have no idea how the French would pronounce that.
Yeah, there's a channel that mostly does cognacs as well called The Last Drop. That's well worth checking out. He does most like whiskies and things as well, but I think he's kind of diversified out to be almost exclusively cognacs now. So if you're interested in cognac, then go and check out The Last Drop.
Yeah. So counter to my previous completely incorrect.
You're getting some green tea, funnily enough, now. Eh?
It is way more herbal now, which totally makes sense. It's much more herbal. What is the word that I wouldn't say herbal for tea? I'm trying to think of the right.
Floral?
Yeah, and a bit spicy in a specific way. I suppose herbal probably is the right word. It's sort of like, to me, like herbal tablet or something.
Yeah.
And it's definitely there on the nose now that I'm nosing the right whiskey. That'll teach me to. I've only got 3 glasses and I poured them in. Once I finished one, I poured the next and I just picked up the same glass again.
Yeah, it's for me. I have to say this has been one of my favorite whiskies this year that's been released this year. The Gronte. It's very surprising and it's still available because people are a bit untrusting stuff they don't know, and obviously Mackmyra don't make any effort to they could have called it green tea on the thing, but they called it Gronte Te.
Yeah.
It confuses people because it's expensive. You know, it's expensive whiskey. It's about £65, maybe a bit cheaper now. And if you're an avid Scotch drinker, you're not going to go and blow your money on something that isn't.
Well, yeah.
No.
My sales pitch to anyone that's skeptical, and obviously most of the people with us are actually drinking along, would be like, first of all, Mackmyra make their quality of whiskey is as good as any Scottish whiskey producer. So there's absolutely no grounds there for turning your nose up. And then secondly, lots of really good Oloroso casks used here. So like if you like sherry cask, which is a big attraction for a lot of people when it comes to whiskey, then this is going to be right up your street anyway. And then you've just got a twist. And I think what's fun about what you just said about it being one of your favorite whiskeys is sometimes, and Waterford was like this, it's kind of, there's a risk where something you get excited about because it's different and interesting and it falls flat and it's just like a failed experiment. And everyone's got examples of that. Like whiskeys they were excited about because there was something a bit different or something new to them. And then it just doesn't, it doesn't rev their engine. And in this case, like it's nice when something comes along that's really you were excited about and curious about and intrigued by, and then it really works for you. So Waterford's new whiskey is like really interesting what they're doing there with the terroir and the single farm origin. And yeah, 3-year-old whiskey, you could be a bit skeptical about how good it's going to be, but it was just really interesting to drink and really good quality. And that was nice because I was kind of anticipating the release. So I think that's come together here. The experiments obviously worked really well.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely agree. I just think, I mean, I'm really looking forward to what they're going to put out next. Like this is, if you know their releases well enough, you'll see that they've got a core range and then they've got the kind of seasonal range, which is what this is part of. And then they've got their moments range, which is a bit more premium, a bit more expensive. So they're always doing stuff like this. You know, they're always releasing some interesting, strange thing. The Winter Gold was another one that came out last year, I think, or maybe the year before, that was superb. Well worth checking out. Yeah, I would say hopefully this has inspired a few people to check out Mackmyra if you were skeptical beforehand.
Yeah, and as I said, they're more. I'm not very familiar with Brooks whiskey, which is sort of their core range dram, but I really like Svensk Ek, Swedish oak, and as I said, I actually think Svensk Rook is a really good example of my type of peated whiskey, which I would describe as like moderately peaty with like sweetness and lightness behind it. So I'd check those out if you enjoyed this at all.
Absolutely. Now, strangely enough, you're not going to believe this, Chris, but we're actually on time, which is a shocker. But we're going to try out something new today because an hour and a half is a long time for anybody. So we're going to have a 5-minute break in between the first 3 and the last 3. The stream will stay active. All that's going to happen is that me and Chris will dip off of the screen and a little ticker will come across the bottom saying interval. And then in about 5 minutes time, we'll come back up and we'll start the next dram. But it basically allows everybody to have a little bit of a break, go and get a drink of water, go to the toilet, whatever. So yeah, if you're ready, Chris, we're going to have a quick interval.
Yeah, we're back in a few minutes. See you soon, folks.
See everybody in 5. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Dram Team's live stream. Hopefully that wasn't too arduous. Hopefully everyone managed to go and refresh and get a drink and whatnot. And we'll be back into the back end of this tasting today. We're doing a big old heap of whiskey today, which is good. I like that.
Yeah, I'm actually on half measures. I fell foul last time. I was planning to 6 in 2 hours. So, I'm sticking to the half measures.
Yeah,
I say that, but actually I did have a full bottle of Amrut because I did taste these a little bit in advance the other night. But the Amrut was one that I didn't get into, so I'm quite excited to try this. I've not drunk a lot of Amrut. I think the first whiskey festival I've attended, which was Amy Seaton's Birmingham Whiskey Festival, which is a fantastic whiskey festival. Anyone who's anywhere near the Midlands, as in within a 3 to 4 hour train journey, which is most people should, except Dan Brown, who's in some far-flung country, should try and get to it because it's a really good event. But I came across Amrut there, and I think I had Fusion and was really, really impressed by it. And I think they might have had a Dream Dram that I really, really enjoyed as well. I can't remember what that was. It might have been Port Cask, I think. But I haven't since tried a lot of their whiskies. So this is sort of really, in terms of what I remember trying, probably only really my second proper experience of Amrut, which is a pity. I have to say, in terms of Indian single malt, Paul John is one that I've had a lot more of. We've worked with them as a brand much more. And I even kind of helped them out once at another whiskey festival kind of 3 or 4 years ago where I helped out on their stand. So I think what I love about Indian single malt is how much it surprises people, because their first reaction is, oh, there's single malt from India, which is often news to a lot of whiskey fans, particularly those who are more aligned to Scotch. And then actually what really surprises them is decent. And I think that's the bit that's delightful. So that was certainly the experience with Paul John, and I think Amrut's the same. Mm-hmm. Now, what might surprise people more about Indian whiskey is that while other countries drink more whiskey per capita, France being the world's, I think that's probably Scotch.
And blended Scotch as well, I think it is. Yeah.
India is the world's largest consumer of whiskey. And I'm going to say this, exactly. Whiskey type drinks, because actually a lot of what they call whiskey in India is not whiskey as we know it here in Europe, because it isn't regulated in the same way. So they'd have more molasses based spirit, more akin to sort of a whiskey rum hybrid, I believe. I don't actually know a lot about the production method of whiskey in India, but what I do know is that Amrut, Paul John, Rampur are the 3 that I'm aware of. I don't know of any others yet. Make single malt whiskey in the same way that Scotch would be made, and it's really good. There's quite a lot of differences in the production process. The Indian barley is quite different and produces a slightly different sort of style of mash, which is the starting point for fermentation and then distillation in the whiskey production process. And the climate's the big one, actually. So essentially what happens with Indian whiskey, and it depends where in India, because India is huge and has quite varied climates. Particularly, it's hot in all of India, but to different degrees and with different amounts of seasons and different amount of humidity. And I think humidity is probably the main thing that varies. So, but pressure from humidity, heat, basically when the whiskey matures way faster, it's sort of like pressure cooking whiskey in the cask. So all that chemical interaction between the cask, the wood, and the liquid is accelerated. So most Indian whiskey has a depth of flavor, maturity, and color beyond what you'd expect for how old it actually is. And I don't know in this case how old this is, but to give you an example of Paul John, if you look at the color of their whiskey and it isn't colored with any sort of chemical coloring, it looks like a 15 to 20-year-old Scotch in terms of depth of color. It's typically 4 to 6 years old. So it really is profound, the impact that the climate has on the maturation process. And you'll also see that with another really great international whiskey brand, which is Kavalan in Taiwan. So that's a really different thing about a lot of international whiskeys is that, and you mentioned this earlier, bourbon. So in hot parts of the US where the same thing with bourbon, a lot of bourbon isn't that old and produces a lot of flavor at a young age, partly because they use virgin oak, partly because of the temperature accelerating the maturation. So really again, if it's your first Indian whiskey, I really hope you enjoy it. I think it's a really surprising category. And there are some really quality whiskies coming out of India, which is great. So all that huge iceberg of demand of the lower quality whiskey that's not necessarily made as proper whiskey as we would call it, then feeds that demand on the high end for the quality and the single malt amongst Indian whiskey drinkers and now elsewhere in the world. So
absolutely,
it's a pretty cool emerging country that I think we're going to see more and more quality whiskey coming out over the next 10 years.
I think so. It's exactly what you said there. I mean, I've tried some of this. They call it like the daily wage whiskey, where it's so cheap, it's unreal, and it's made from like a neutral grain spirit. So it's basically a gin or a vodka before it's been flavored, and then it's mixed with sometimes even imported whiskey, and it really isn't very good, but it's what a lot of the daily wage workers will drink. Most of this stuff you're trying today, like that's the important thing to remember, is to check your brands out. Like what Chris said a second ago about the most widely sold whiskey. Widely is not the right word, but in terms of volume, you think it might be something like Johnny Walker Red Label, but it's actually Officer's Choice Indian whiskey by almost double any other brand of whiskey in the world. But they can produce it so quickly, and they don't age it very well. And I tried one of their premium versions on the channel, and it was, but stuff like this, Amrut, Paul John, and Rapper, they're just absolute quality. And it's important to know that before you go into just sourcing random Indian whiskies. You gotta make sure you get a good reputable brand. Otherwise, you're not going to get the same experience you're expecting to if you're a Scotch drinker. Yeah. And
I think both Amrut and Paul John and Ramp are a bit new. They've both done a really good job of getting the word out about their drams in the UK, and they have a kind of cult following who are very loyal to them. So I'd thoroughly recommend checking them out. I'm really enjoying this. I've not had this expression before.
No, nor me, actually.
I didn't know what to expect from it.
Superb.
Yeah, really, really, really quality.
Yeah, really good. I mean, I'm not sure what barrels they've used here, but for me personally, I think it's probably just maybe ex-bourbon barrels. They can get away with using refills as well instead of first fills because of that accelerated aging that you said. I think if they used some first fill or virgin oak in 2 years' time, it would be like...
I reckon that's why you don't like the Cavalan Sherry Solist, because it's just basically like drinking sort of a whiskey sherry super strong liqueur because of the aging. So what I really enjoy about this, I think this is a thing, like, so anyone who's ever been to India, or maybe just peripherally what your kind of stereotype concept of India is from sort of the mythology and history that surrounds India, Indian gods, Hinduism, the Taj Mahal, that sort of thing, temples. Like, I love how much, whether on purpose or by accident, the brand plays into that sort of stuff. So listen to this, as quality. Amrut, and this is bear in mind, this is me trying to fit in a small number of words onto a tasting card where I have a very strict word limit, or the font would be illegible. So Amrut takes its name from a mythical golden pot containing the elixir of life that sprang forth when ancient gods and Rakshasas, demons, churned the oceans using the mountain Meru as a churner. And that is about a quarter of the length of the actual description of the origin of the name Amrut on the website. So that they're so verbose and flowery in the description of things in a way that really aligns to that sort of stereotype, mythical, legendary view of Indian gods and romance and the Taj Mahal and temples and all that sort of thing. And so are their tasting notes are equally kind of lengthy and detailed and poetic, I would say. So I quite enjoy that about them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't tend to. I've got the cards laid out here just in case I need to have a look, but I don't tend to when I'm reviewing like a whiskey, for instance, I don't tend to read any of that sort of stuff because it's it can get a bit flowery for sure. I've just done a video on a single cask bottle. The single cask, the brand. And I was saying on there, I really like how on the label it just has information about how it was made, what barrel it was, blah blah blah, and then the rest of the bottle is just completely free of anything. And for me, I think there's definitely a kind of middle ground to be had. I've seen the bottles of these, like for instance the Amrut. They come with a nice tube, and they're just like top to bottom in fancy kind of motifs and wording and things like that.
This one's actually one of the relatively simple ones, but there's a lot of gold. That's how I'd put it. A lot of gold and cream. And I'm going to block my face out so that it zooms properly. There we go.
Yeah, they've changed it fairly recently, actually, because it used to look a little different to that, I'm sure. But it's good.
Yeah, it might be a newer version, I don't know. But yeah, I remember that about the fusion, kind of playing into the sort of ornate styling again of like, well, I don't know if it's truly traditional, but stereotype traditional Indian decor. The Paul John, on the other hand, is relatively simple. I quite like that about their packaging. It makes me laugh because Paul John, like people, it sounds English, right? Or actually, to me, I think it sounds French because it's basically Jean Paul backwards. But yeah, I think there can be a habit of kind of playing into the sort of, playing into the stereotype, and I wonder if that comes like, is it their view of the Western market, what they want, or is it actually what they do in their own country? And I don't know that. I should probably find that out. Because you see, with something like Officer's Choice, to me that has apps, and I don't know what that means, and I don't know what the packaging is decorated with. Maybe you can set me straight. That's just wax of imperialism, and I don't know how much it's true that in India, whether they maybe look back on. I would assume they don't look back on that period of us treating them extremely badly, fondly, but maybe there's still that thing where like that military sort of imperialistic part of their history is something that they somehow hold some status in a weird way. But who knows? The main thing is the whiskey is very good,
and that's exactly right. I mean, strip it all back and concentrate on the whiskey itself. It fits perfectly into this lineup where it is, and it's just an all-round really tasty dram. I'm not sure of the price of it. I think it's probably a touch more than you would pay for equivalent of Scotch, but for
I've got the RP at 48, so I think you'll probably normally be able to pick this up between 40 and 45 from the right place. I think it's about right. I would say that's about, for me, what I'm looking for any whiskey that's below 50 quid is just a really drinkable, enjoyable. I don't necessarily expect it to be super remarkable, but I want it to be really, especially towards the end of the top end of that price category, I want it to be really solid and something that I'd say I actually really enjoy drinking. And I think this covers that off for me. It's got a lot of things that I like going on. Fruit. There's quite a lot of bourbon cask influence to me. It's like vanilla and oak kind of polish flavors. So yeah, I'm really impressed by that. Super enjoyed it.
Well, I've already finished my half dram as well. I couldn't help myself. It was really good. And I've done that with the green tea as well.
I've gone full dram on that one, so that's my only full dram of the evening. But yeah, really nice, really good.
Really good. I guess we should probably move on to the next one now, because we've got a double whammy of North American.
Yeah, well, I've already tucked it into my Michter's earlier, thinking it was the Gronte Te from Mackmyra. So I can tell you it's great.
It is good.
Okay, yeah, let's dive in. Say hello to Lee J. I can see Lee J's joined us. Say hi, West Country gents.
There he is.
Don't know where you are, Lee J. So I am in the West Country. Are you a West Country man as well? Vin's actually technically at East Midlands.
I mean, it's Warwickshire, West Midlands. Yeah, I guess you could probably get away with saying.
Well, I'm not by birth. By birth, I'm a northerner. I was born in Durham, but I actually grew up in the West Midlands, so I'm a Midlander as well, technically. I've just migrated southwest gradually over time.
Graham's calling you out a little bit. He says he can take green tea on this one.
Yeah, well, that just shows you what I said about blind tasting. I was effectively not blind tasting, but sort of misleading tasting, and that I thought I was drinking something else. That shows you how much what you think you're drinking really guides what you your experience. But this has been a revelation to me. So I love Michter's. Again, like one of the first whiskey festivals I went to after Amy's in Birmingham was the Whiskey Exchange show in London. They have an insane number of whiskies, like maybe, actually, you know, I must have gone to that one first because I met Amy at that festival in October and then later went to her festival in March, 6 months later or so. So I think that was the first whiskey festival I went to, probably coming up to 5 years ago. 2015, maybe, yeah, it would have been 2015, where I went around. No, it can't have been. I would have been away. 2016, I'm not sure. But I went around and we met brands and we talked about the idea of the Dram Team and kind of tried to get them on board with the concept. And we talked to people at Michter's extensively. And indeed, I met Amy at the Michter's stand. So I tried the whole range because every now and then you meet this brand ambassador at a whiskey festival. They're just really good at talking about what they do. They're really good at talking about the whiskey. They're super passionate. And they just draw you in, and before you know it, you've steamed through like 6 whiskies in a row at their stand. And bear in mind, there's like 100 stands at that festival. So even at 10 mil serves, if you try 6 whiskies at every stand, the latter part of your day is going to be a rough ride. So first rule of whiskey festivals, if you should ever attend one, which I would advise you to do, go super slow, be really picky about what you try, drink at your leisure, and really just have a plan when you go in to only drink things that really appeal to you, and don't try more than 2 from any stand for the most part. But yeah, Michter's, I love bourbon and I love rye. So those are the ones I'm drawn to of theirs, and they're both really good. But this sour mash whiskey is a sort of unusual category. I'm not even aware of another one. I don't know if there is another one, if you know another one. So really what it is it reuses the waste product basically from the previous fermentation and essentially just puts it through the whiskey process again. So it's like recycling. And the way they describe it is being a little bit like having a sourdough starter for bread.
Yeah.
Not that I've ever made sourdough bread. I hear it's all the rage in lockdown. But it was super popular in the States in the 70s and 80s. And I'm just not familiar with it as a category of whiskey. I really just not, as I said, I'm not aware of it existing outside of Michter's, but this is beautiful. This is really, really good. And this for me is everything that's good about an American whiskey, like the caramel, the oak, the vanilla, which you would get from a good bourbon, but it's a little bit different to a bourbon for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And if you're not like kind of into your bourbons and American whiskies, the price tag on Michter's can put you off. But again, hopefully this has convinced you to try them, because you can really chuck some money at Michter's if you try hard enough. Some of their
10-year-old
barrel offerings, like the have you tried the toasted rye single barrel? It's out of this world. It really is. Their core range is about sort of £50 a bottle. This sort of fits into that. But it really is superb. They're making really good quality whiskey there.
We're thinking about bringing out for the first time. We think we might just have enough people following us now and part of the club that we could get away with doing a one-off rye January box. So we might have to pencil that in as the 6th dram if we can track enough down.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one to get hold of because they batch release it and it goes pretty quickly now. But when I went to the London festival a couple of years ago, I did exactly the same thing. I walked up to Michter's with my friend who hadn't tried Michter's before, and I tried about 4 or 5 of the 7 or 8 that they had on the stand, and I still went through all 8. And it was a dreadful, like you said, a dreadful second half of the day. But it's just one of those brands that just every single one of their releases fits a different category of American whiskey. And if you've tried anything of that category before, you will like that bottle. I can almost guarantee it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Dan's saying Wild Turkey and Jim Beam are just a few that use sour mash as SOP. You're going to have to tell me what you mean by SOP. I'm not, as I said earlier, like Scottish is the category of whiskey that I'm most familiar with in terms of rules and production processes. I am not well educated about the rest of the world, unless like Mackmyra, they do it relatively similarly.
I think he just means standard operating practice.
Is that literally okay? I'm familiar with that. I didn't. So that's interesting. So it is now. I'll be curious to know how they're able to call themselves bourbon if they're doing something that's outside the. Because technically, I would have thought that. I don't know actually how much the bourbon and rye rules specify about the mash bill, but The mash bill is just a proportion of each grain that goes into an American whiskey. So bourbon has to be 51% corn. This is not for your benefit, Vin. I know you know this. Rye has to be 51% rye, and that's essentially it. I don't know what corn. They also have corn whiskey as a separate category, which I assume is just 100% corn, but I don't know what it has to be called a corn whiskey. Maybe it's 80%. Not clear on that one. So I wonder how sour mash fits into that, because I can't remember reading about that in any rules.
It's a minefield, bourbon, because it's like they've got so many subcategories as well. Like, you know, obviously you've got your kind of like your straight bourbons and things like that. And I found, especially when I'm doing my videos on YouTube, it's you can very easily make a slip of the tongue. And you can call something a bourbon when it isn't. I'm trying to think of a good example. Something like Tin Cup isn't officially a bourbon, but it's bourbon-like, and
or not aged in the right place, or not the right barrel. What's the?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, because it's a sourced whiskey. That is, I can't remember why it doesn't get away with it. But yeah, the rules are a little bit more complicated, I think, than Scotch. Although I think probably the most complicated rules that I've come across are the Canadian whiskey rules, which are kind of next level.
If it says rye on it, it's not necessarily rye. That's the thing that I've learned about Canada. So talking of which, are you ready to go on to number 6?
Yeah, definitely.
I did a small amount of Michter's left because I polished half of it off thinking that it was Gronte. In my defense, Graham, I still did get some quite herbal notes. But for me, the main thing that comes through is like all that vanilla and oak, like Werther's Originals, like some really tasty stuff in there for that sour mash one.
Yeah, really tasty. I'm really glad you included that. It's not the first time you put a Michter's in a box, is it? I don't think.
No, so our second ever box had Michter's bourbon in it, but that is it. Like as you say, it's quite pricey, so it's difficult to kind of fit it in. Again, right in January. I love Michter's. We recently bought directly from specialty brands who distribute Michter's in the UK. And I make the distinction specialty brands because there's another company called Specialty Drinks, which is sort of the trade arm of the Whiskey Exchange. There's this sort of amorphous blob that is the Whiskey Exchange and all their sister companies. So specialty brands distribute Michter's, Nikka, Amrut, not a coincidence that all three are in the same box, in the UK. In fact, they're probably, in terms of UK distribution, they've got probably the best range of international whiskies, because as well as those three, they also have Cavalan, which are probably 4 of my top 10 international whiskies from being distributed from one company. I did see that comment pop up. Thanks, Greg. We have started accepting payment in gold bullion, as you can see. I'll actually show you what this is. I'm really glad I got a wheelie chair. Whiz around the opposite of that. So this is actually
I'm intrigued.
It's bottling wax.
Oh,
it's a 1 kilo block of bottling wax. And the thing behind the gold bullion is a waxing pot. This thing here. So it's for dipping wax. Got an exciting project on the go at the Dram Team at the moment. We have a new client who is wanting to put wax on their miniatures. So as well as doing our own sets, we do miniatures for other people. We're working with an exciting new client, and we're waxing their miniatures, and we're just trying to find a better way of doing it. So we're doing a bit of research and sort of application of wax to wax bottles. It's a bit of whiskey geekery, probably a little bit too much operationally orientated for the drinkers here, but it appeals to the geek in me anyway. So that's why that's out and about in the office. Right, how are you getting on with that Michter's, Vin? Have you wrapped up?
I think it's a good time to move on, especially since you mentioned the Whiskey Exchange, which brings us neatly onto this.
I'm doing very well with my segues.
Yeah, definitely. I have to say, if people haven't tried this yet, I think you're in for a real treat. I put North America on this because I think you've mentioned on the cards, it's Vermont-based US company, but they get all of their liquid so far from a farm in Canada.
Yeah, well, they started out they bought what they called a parcel. I don't really know what that means.
Yeah,
I assume it was more than one parcel. A large amount of Canadian rye. Now, actually, as I said earlier, in Canada, the words rye and whiskey are effectively interchangeable synonyms. So, for example, one of my favorite whiskeys that I've had in the past few years, my other half is from Vancouver originally, he's Canadian. So we went to visit her parents and we got hold of, I found on the shelf in the local liquor store, a 21-year-old rye. And I was like, 21-year-old rye? And it was about 70 quid. I'm like, I'm just getting a bottle. I don't care that I haven't tried it. Like, you just, a 21-year-old aged rye is just like unheard of over here. And it's 70 quid. So I got a bottle and it was really beautiful. And I even shared, so we brought about a bottle back. I shared it with some of my local whiskey friends as a kind of bottle share one night. We drank it. We were like raving about the rye flavors and the subtle, well-aged, smooth, mellow rye. Went back the next year to get some more. Well, I didn't go. I went back to see my girlfriend's parents, not to buy more whiskey, I promise. But did buy some more while I was seeing my girlfriend's parents. And did a bit more research into the producer. Turns out that lovely, mellow, rye, spicy whiskey was 100% corn. And actually, that's one of the ones that I sent you a sample of at some point, Vin. So yeah, that's when I found out that in Canadian whiskey, like traditionally, they just call it rye. It's a bit like the word Scotch. So in Scotland, you'd call it Scotch. Maybe the Scotch call it whiskey. I don't actually know. But like Scotch and whiskey essentially mean the same thing when you're talking about when you're in Scotland. So it's the same in Canada with rye and whiskey. So if it says rye on the bottle in Canada, it doesn't mean anything in terms of what's actually in it. So I do think a lot of the modern producers are more following the line of modern producers over here. And a lot of them have come from breweries and they focus on the grain that goes into it. So they're a bit more specific about what they mix, and they do single malts and they use different sorts of malts. Because that's, if you're coming from the brewing industry and into whiskey production, you tend to be focused around the sort of malt that you're brewing with and then distilling. So there's a bit more clarity with those sort of producers, but traditional producers in Canada will just call something rye regardless of what's in it. So in this case, I believe that because Whistlepig hang their hat on being a rye specialist in the US version of US sense of the word, that what they probably brought from Canada in a large amount when they started their business and brought down over the border into Vermont was actually rye whiskey. I would hope. So, and then they are now producing their own. Now, actually, in terms of the origin of this 10-year-old, I don't know which it is. I don't remember coming across that information. But as you point out, I do think everyone's in for a treat. I love rye whiskey. I love the spicy kick that it has often. And I love the sort of dark toffee flavors and things like that it often comes with.
Now, I should say, if anyone's not yet, if they're patient enough to not yet have tried this, it does pack a bit of a punch if you're not used to that sort of thing. 58% not to be sniffed at, and the rye as well. We haven't had a rye so far today. I think you've had ryes in the packs before, but
yeah, sure, like one or two.
Yeah, rye is very different from normal kind of whiskey flavors, and like what Chris said, you're into the kind of spiciness, but I've really struggled with it over the last 3 years. One of the few that I've really hit home with is stuff like this. I've tried a couple of these Whistlepig barrel picks now. British Bourbon Society released one, and Nichols and Perk have released one, and obviously TWE as well. And they're all always fantastic. They're not cheap. Even the standard releases they do are like the farm stock are not cheap at all.
No, they're not.
We've got whiskey wings popped in.
What you bring that up? Like if you bought a 10-year-old Scotch, Christ, you wouldn't pay 125 quid. Not unless it was like a 10-year-old Lafroig bottled in the 70s or something. So like if you think about it in that way, but when it comes to barrel strength rye at 10 years old, that's just super rare. And part of that's what we talked about earlier with in terms of the speed of maturation and the climate. But in this case, it's just it's a slightly more expensive category, and Whistlepig are a slightly more expensive producer. I believe there's also a thing where like the yield of rye and the process of distilling rye is quite difficult. I don't think it's particularly friendly as a grain, is my understanding, in terms of the sugars and the enzymes and things like that. But I'm not very well informed in that regard. So, yeah, so you brought some comment there. So, Whiskey Wings, I think is that Mike? I'm going to say Mike. Hello. He's already drunk his Whistlepig. Glad to hear that, Mike. And he's got the Mackmyra in his glass. Make sure it's the Mackmyra, not the Michters, Mike. That's my own piece of advice based on my experience this evening. And we see we've got a question from Lee J as well about are we hoping to work alongside any local distilleries? So, depends what you mean, but we already have had the Cotswolds. So the two closest single malt distilleries are the Cotswolds, which is sort of 2 hours away, and Penderyn in Wales, which is about 2 hours away as well. I think they might be moving, so maybe they're going to come closer or further. But those two are very, very similarly like equidistant to where I am in Bristol. We do have a local distillery that, if anyone's a gin drinker, they may have heard of originally as Psychopomp. So there's a really quite well-known gin here locally called Psychopomp Gin. And they, a couple of years back, probably 2.5 years back now, opened, maybe it's 1.5 years, they opened a grain distillery called Circumstance. So the Psychopomp and Circumstance. And they're doing some really interesting stuff with the grains that they blend in. They've got a quite an unusual still setup. It's sort of a combo pot column still. I couldn't explain it to you without showing you a picture, and I honestly don't necessarily understand it. But they're doing some really interesting things around the grain and the fermentation. So quite young spirit, but really interesting approach to how they combine the grains and the yeasts and the fermentation times, and then the cask as well, to produce young grain spirit that you can't call whiskey. And put it out there in the local market and elsewhere. So I haven't tried a lot of their stuff, but I tried a lot of their stuff at their 1-year party, birthday party locally. We might get around to putting something in. We'll probably wait until it's officially whiskey. I think, to be honest, with our audience, it's not something that would be hugely popular because it's very, very different to normal whiskey. And much like Vin said about putting rye in even can be sort of borderline offensive to someone who's used to drinking single malt scotch because it's so different. And in general, that's true for all the American whiskies. We do not dedicate boxes to them, and we do not put more than one, really. In this case, 2. We snuck 2 into this box because it just doesn't align to most of our drinkers' preferences, which we have to be aware of, even while simultaneously trying to push their boundaries and get them trying new things. So yeah, but do look out for, as I say, we're leaning towards a rye January box just for fun. Might do a super limited release, might make it a bit special and kind of do it as a higher priced item. And we could do a tasting like this where we're trying, if we produce 50 units of it, we'll try and get everyone here to taste it together and do something more focused on a category that doesn't get enough attention, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd be up for that. Like I said, I've been exploring rye for a couple of years now, and I'm still a little bit hit or miss. So it'd be great to do a dedicated side-by-side to really kind of push me through that. I've tried a few different brands now that I'm getting on with.
Yeah.
But there are definitely some out there, like the real, like fully rye, like almost 100% rye mash bills that are just a little bit too much for me sometimes. Something like this, this has been aged for 10 years, mellowed out a little bit. This is just absolutely superb. Really, really like this. But this is like what happened to me with peat as well. I had to really fight to enjoy peat over the years. Finally got there, and then someone dropped rye on my lap, and now I've got to fight to try and find some enjoyment in that.
Well, I think like all good tastes in life, the best ones are acquired. So you just got to keep playing on. I think what I really love this example here. So Graham's head off. Bye, Graham, if you've already gone. He said the highlight for him was the Whistlepig, and he wasn't expecting that. So that's really fun for me to hear, and that's the whole point of trying stuff like this. So Graham, if you watch this back later to see the 5 to 10 minutes that you missed, look out for Rye January when we get that sorted out. Dan, you need to log in next time and be part of the presenting panel because you clearly know a lot more about whiskey than me and, dare I say it, Vin. So Rye there chipping in with more actual scientific understanding of what I described earlier, namely that the difficulty with rye, and possibly one of the drivers of the expense, is actually just the challenge of distilling with it. So what Dan's outlined there is that it's high in starch and low in the enzyme that breaks down starch into sugar. So it usually ends up gumming up the mashing machine if there's too much of it. So think about, I guess, really stodgy porridge would be my layman's interpretation of that. And I think actually, as a side note to that, which may become relevant next month, depending on how my whiskey ordering goes in the next few days, grain whiskey often includes a significant proportion of malted barley, precisely because malted barley has a higher amount of the enzyme you need to break down starch into sugar, which malting helps contribute to. So often, I think you sort of alluded to this earlier, rye isn't normally 100% rye. It's quite difficult to work with in that way, chemically or biochemically. So you get a bit more of a challenging distillation process, or rather mashing and fermentation process with some other grains that aren't malted barley, which is, I assume, and I don't know this, but I would assume that's why it's much more traditional to use malted barley. Probably easier to work with if you didn't have sophisticated understanding of biochemistry, I would guess.
Definitely. I mean, you have to look at like why we use malted barley in Scotland, especially, is because years and hundreds of years worth of experimentation has made it so that this is the easiest way of doing it. It's not necessarily the best way technically. You can get some really great results by experimenting again now. People are starting to pull in different kind of cask type of wood types and things like that, which is great to see. I imagine a lot of those things were tried years and years and years ago before we really put a scientific method onto it. So I think it's just fantastic that where we are right now. I'm worried about where we are on the bell curve. Hopefully, we're still on the incline, not at the peak, but we'll find out in the next 10 years, I guess, when it all comes down the other side. But yeah, people are putting out some incredible stuff right now. Experimental, as we've seen today with like the Gronte Te, for instance, Cognac finish we've had today, rye. It's been a smorgasbord of different whiskey styles.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, you don't always get that with the World Whiskey boxes, but I think this particular box did lend itself well to kind of exhibiting the variety that you can get, not just in World Whiskey, but in the production method, mash bill, cask maturation, like all of that stuff that is part of the production method is kind of on display here in every possible way. And I think that's quite fun to learn about. And as people might have picked up on, clearly something that I need to learn a bit more about when it comes to the international whiskies. So on that note, actually, we do have some very good content out on the blog at the moment around world whiskies. So if you want to learn a bit more about Japanese, American, other international whiskies, do check out the Dram Team blog. It is just the dramteamblog.co.uk. You can also link to it from the About Us on our main website, and we put it on our social. But I think there's some really interesting facts to be picked up and learn, and then those differences in production method are to be explored, because it might lead you down an avenue that you've not gone down before in terms of flavor style that you really enjoy. So as I said earlier, I'm quite open-minded about the spirits, cognac and armagnac, and rum as well. And I think that should always be the case for other styles and categories of whiskey outside of Scotch, outside of single malt. Because if you don't have that open-mindedness and you don't try them from time to time and give them a chance, you're really missing out. So I'd encourage people to kind of, if they've enjoyed this, to go away and give world whiskey a bit more of a thorough exploration. And we'll keep doing our part. I think between now and Christmas, I would say that we're probably going to we're going to have a bit more grain whiskey. We're going to have some blends, and we're going to have some probably, and this kind of harps a little bit back to Lee J's question. I wouldn't say local, but more local than Scotland, as in English. So we've got plans to try and find a way to put those into the box before Christmas from some of the up and coming. The English whiskey scene is definitely on the up on that bell curve, and really keen to feature some quality English whiskies. So we're looking at that between now and Christmas, if we can find the right slots to put them in the lineups. And of course, a lot of quality Scotch. So it's going to be it's going to be a pretty good ride between now and Christmas, is how I'd put it. So looking forward to doing more of this, Finn.
Absolutely, yeah. And where we can, if the appetite's there, for sure, we'll get stuff out. Callum said here as well, thanks for tasting Mackmyra Gronte Te, won it for us. And that's cool. Something that we probably should do is ask everybody what they thought maybe won the pack. Obviously, it'll take a minute or so for the live stream to catch up with the chat. But please do chuck it in. Let us know which you preferred. If there's any that you didn't particularly like as well, is always good to hear.
So
for me,
like Whiskey Wings was enjoying them at Mackmyra, and then has some pretty high praise for the Michters. Mackmyra Gronte Te, as you say, winning it for Callum. Dom's here. Hello, Dom. Dom's another local man here in Bristol. Hope you're doing all right. Looking dapper in your picture there, Tom. So yeah, it seems like a few of these whiskies have hit home with people. For me, what was your favourite, Vin? What was your? Should we try most surprising for you? What was your most surprising?
Oh well, I mean, so most surprising is the Amrut single malt, because I've tried before. I've tried the Gronte and the Michters, and I've tried not this Whistlepig but others. So I knew what to expect. The Amrut is they're always surprising to me, because like you said before, even though I know that they're good quality, I've tried them before, and I still expect to find one that I'm not going to like. And yet when I try them, any of these Indian whiskies, they're always exceptional.
I agree with you on that. I think the Amrut, I really enjoyed it. I didn't really know what to expect, because there are other names of whiskey have slightly more exotic descriptions or like premises, and this is just Amrut single malt, and that's all it's called, which is sort of vanilla as a name goes, but really quality. But for me, the big surprise was still the Nikka Days. Like, I just thought that was way more drinkable and flavoursome and tasty than I would have expected, because of my preconception around the fact that it's 40% and that it's positioned as for mixing and that sort of thing. So I really enjoyed that. Which was your favourite though?
Well, the Whistlepig, I think he's probably a cut above the rest, but I am a huge fan of high ABVs. It's probably my downfall, to be fair, because I do love a really high ABV.
It's a dangerous path. You don't want to.
Yeah.
The scales off your eyes once you've had strong.
I can definitely feel it. We've only had a sip of each of these, but I've got a Friday afternoon zing about myself now. But the Gronte is an exceptional whiskey, and will definitely go down as one of my favourites of the year, and probably hopefully I'm going to keep that bottle back there for as long as I can possibly keep it. The one that's open downstairs is almost finished, because I can't keep my mitts off of it.
It's also the sort of whiskey you want to tell people about, isn't it? Like, it's an evangelism whiskey.
Definitely. Peter Gerard says the Nikka for him has come out as on top, which is awesome. Like I said, great session whiskey.
Glad you enjoyed that one. So for me, my favourite Michters, like I love American whiskey, I really do, and that was just spot on. So I really enjoyed that. What I did after that, probably Lambay, like the cognac influence there for me. Not completely sure about the middle of it, if I'm honest, but like the finish with the apples and the caramel and that nose, I think the nose of all of them when you get a good nose of the whiskey, it's sort of almost like you just could spend all day nosing it, and Lambay was definitely there for me on that one. So, but really quality all through. I didn't think any of those were disappointing for me. Price value wise, there might be some questions I'd have about them versus other things I could get in that category. But in the spirit of exploration, just absolutely really happy with that as a lineup. So and if it sounds weird to people that I'm surprised about that, again, I don't taste them in advance. I just pick 6 that I'm interested to try. And so when I actually come to try them, normally after we've produced the box and shipped it out, like it is for me learning, well, how well did my expectation about choosing the lineup and picking things I thought were interesting then materialize into reality? how much I enjoyed them. And here, that's really, I've thoroughly enjoyed that. I'd happily own one of each of those.
Definitely.
And share them with people. So I'm glad people have enjoyed exploring them tonight.
For sure. Yeah, completely agree. This has been a quality tasting from start to finish. And I actually just went back to the Nikka Days after trying all of that exceptional whiskey. And I have to say, it still stands up. I was expecting it to be a bit muted now, but
I haven't got any left, so I can't do that. I need to wait for the spares and rejects to come back from the packing company. Then I can go back and try some more. Most of the whiskey never makes it here to me in whole bottle form anymore, so it will just go straight to the bottlers and gets sampled out. So if I really like something, I have to either buy it afterwards or I have to wait for the spares and rejects and keep my fingers crossed that there's more of the one that I like. So we'll give it a few weeks and maybe there'll be a few spares. What I would say about this one is if anyone has enjoyed it to the extent that they would recommend it to anyone else, it's still going out as our new box for subscribers. There is a dedicated page for that box on the website under the box of the month. I think it's /World Whiskies or /Worldwide Whiskies. Sorry. We've actually only got about 80 left, which sounds like quite a few, but we produced over 500. So between the first shipment to all our existing subscribers and how fast they're being out the door, if anyone's interested in picking one up, do it pretty fast because we're probably going to not have any stock in the latter half of the month. So it might be a little bit of a dry back half of the month for the Dram team before we manage to get our next box out the door for August the 1st.
Definitely.
It's tasting bin. I'm actually away for the first week of August, so we might have to do it a little bit later in the month. We'll put out the same sort of communication, try and get a label into the box or something similar so that people know what to expect. But next month, a little on the fence about what we're going to do. But as I say, I'm expecting now there to be to be Scotch again, but probably a mix of malt and grain, which I think is going to be quite fun for me. I really like grain whiskey, and some of the lineups, the expressions I'm eyeing up for that box, because sadly it still isn't ordered at the bottlers and ready to go. Bit last minute at the moment. Particularly appealing, I think. So if anyone tried the Douglas Lang box, which was mainly malt driven, but had the 6 dram as the Girvan, really good example that was very popular of a single grain. So looking potentially next month having a bit more of that. So we'll see what happens. So we've got a couple of months of really good Scotch coming up regardless, and then some cool things running into Christmas. So keep tuning in. Anyone that's come along tonight, thank you for joining us. It's been great fun for me. Great questions, particular hat tip to Dan Brown for his awesome technical input on the whiskey making process, especially since he's not even getting to drink the drams. And Ben, thank you to you for joining us and for running the show again. Really nice to hang out and drink some drams with you.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been a great stream. I really enjoyed this box. I've got, like you said earlier, I've got some left over to try at a later time. Probably end up going to put most of that in my infinity bottles, I have to say. They are infinity bottles, without a doubt.
Well, would you have any other favourite world whiskies before we sign off that you'd recommend to people? Or do you have any particular favourite brands or expressions that you'd recommend people try? We've touched on a few, I think, but just before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think earlier on you mentioned Starwood. Their normal release, I think it's just called the Starwood Single Malt, is great, but they released a 2-year-old not whiskey. They can call it whiskey over there, but when they released it over here, it was called New Project Spirits or something like that. And it was utterly exceptional.
I remember New World kind of
something.
They call it young grain spirit or something like that, didn't they? Yeah.
And it was 50 quid for a 2-year-old not whiskey. And people didn't really take to it, but I tried it at the festivals a couple of times and it was just utterly astounding. So they've had a big old say again, sorry, Chris.
We might have even had that in the box, I think. New World Project or something like that.
Aged
or something. Yeah, I think Starwood did some great stuff. I think my recommendation would actually be check out some indie bottlers doing world whiskey, because that's become increasingly popular. So previously indie bottlers would traditionally just do Scotch because that was what sold. but they've really been cottoning on. Maybe they can buy it cheaper, I don't know, and make more money on it. But I think mainly just quality-wise, there's indie bottlers now. So you mentioned the single cask earlier. I think the square bottles, really cool looking bottle, factually. There you go. Lovely little stylish label with some details of the cask and that. So they've done, I know, some English amongst other things. Boutique whiskey do some really good international drams, including the Dutch one, whose name I can't remember. The Zoidam Distillery, I think, often, and then the brand that they release under something else. And English whiskies are quite popular now with independent bottlers for sure, in general, outside of the single cask. So yeah, check out some independent bottlings of English whiskey and other whiskies from around the world, because they're often cask strength and they're really exciting. So I definitely recommend doing that. And we'll try and get some more in the box at some point. I said between now and Christmas, looking definitely at some English and maybe some other things. So we'll see what we manage.
Absolutely. Awesome. I think it's a great time to be a member of the club. So hopefully if anyone's been watching this who isn't a member and can be a member, sorry, Dan. I imagine Dan's gone now because it's super early in the morning for him. So yeah, hopefully
it's distillery, I assume, based on his knowledge.
Do you know, he probably should, but I think he's just a super knowledgeable guy. As a lot of this like YouTube stuff attracts the super knowledgeable people, so it's really great to be able to engage with that sort of thing. Because, like you say, I mean, me and you aren't the most knowledgeable people, we fully admit to that. But it's cool to have people like Dan in the comments to set us right. But yeah, it's been a great box, and I'm really looking forward to the stuff, like especially the little nuggets of teas you've given us there for the next couple of months.
I'll see what I can make happen. It's kind of nearly a full-time job at the moment, trying to juggle all the expressions and the lineups, because we're having to work more closely with the brands. It's not as straightforward. So, but it's fun. Like I say, we have got a couple of particularly cool boxes lined up. So I'm excited for the next. Seems to say like weird to talk about Christmas in July, but literally every box between now and then is pretty much at least themed out and penciled in the brands and some of the whiskies. So yeah, lots of cool stuff coming up. Right, should we wrap up, Vin?
Yeah, I think we should. Yeah, I think it's been a great stream. Hopefully everyone's enjoyed it. Make sure if you've watched this on the replay that you let us know in the comments below of the YouTube and Facebook videos what your favorites were, and we'll try and get back to you. But thanks for the people that joined us live. It's been a great one. If you don't know who I am, I'm Vin PF. I run No Nonsense Whisky on YouTube and various other socials. And of course, Chris is the founder and head honcho of the Dram Team. So it's great to put a face to the box that we get each month.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'll echo what Vin said. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Pop any questions you have in the comments. Pop any suggestions you have about world whiskies or things you'd like to see in the box. We've also got a cool series coming up soon, starting on the blog about whiskey under 50. We're just going to be a wide-ranging exploration of whiskey under 50, primarily focused on stuff that people won't necessarily have tried, so like non-supermarket, but we'll be mixing in some classic favorites as well. So if you've got any favorite whiskies under 50 quid, pop those in the comments. We'll pick that up and we'll see if we can incorporate them. Yeah, just get in touch with any suggestions or thoughts, any feedback. Always really great to hear from people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, there you go.
Thank you, Ben.
That's all. That's all she wrote, as they say, isn't it? So,
have a great weekend, everybody. Have a great weekend, Vin. And we'll see you next month, more mid-August, I reckon, for next month's tasting. If your wife hasn't given birth by then, Vin, are we in safe territory?
I was going to say, I mean, we'll have a chat about it, but I will probably have a small human to look after then, so I might not be here, but we'll make the stream happen.
You can have the sort of Bubba Boost.
Papoose.
Papoose, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see. Maybe I'll be going solo next month. An hour and a half's monologue on whiskey from me. But thank you very much for your help in the meantime, mate. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. And I'll see you all on various social medias and whatnot. And of course, on the Dram Team socials, feel free to get in touch. You can see them knocking around on the bottom of the screen there. So, yeah.
Cheers, everyone. Good night.
See you all next time.
Bye-bye.